Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues, your source for all things Everton, and welcome back to the Toffee Blues podcast. I'm joined by Harry once again. How you doing, mate?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. I feel like I'm on the back end of a cold and flu that's left me sounding like our previous manager for the best part of this week. So hopefully that doesn't come across to our listeners and viewers.
Yeah, I was gonna say it'll be PTSD for some people, I'm sure. If it
Exactly,
does.
rocking. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, just be talking about on the grass the whole time, and
The fine
all the
margins.
horrible
Yeah.
cliches that everyone got sick of. Yeah, but it's yeah, we're coming off the back of another game, and and another game coming up. We're right in the middle of this kind of horrible run of fixtures that everyone was dreading a little bit. And to be honest, I mean, so far it's not it's kind of going how I expected, really. In that, I think we're giving decent accounts of ourselves. We're still not really getting as many wins on the board as ideally we'd like, given the run of results we had going into this. But regardless, I think so far we've given quite a good account of ourselves. However, um, we've kind of been speaking a bit about how Forest weirdly might be the toughest game out of the lot, but we'll get on to that later on, I'm sure. But we'll start by looking back on the Arsenal game, and it's weird. When I think back to the game, not a lot jumps out at me. I think it was one of those games. I think that might even have been part of the design from us, and that we didn't really want it to be too frenetic because if you let a team like Arsenal get on top of you, um, then well, Real Madrid found out to their detriment just a few days later, of course. Yeah, like I said, what were your overall thoughts on the game? Really, I guess is a better place to start than any.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be honest, it's one of those, isn't it, where on paper, at any point in the season, a draw against Arsenal, given who Arsenal have been in the story of the Premier League over the last few years, it's a good point, right? And that's that. So I'd say the headline is on paper, it was a good point. I think where I'm at with Everton at the moment is that you mentioned sort of the run that we were on prior to the Liverpool game, and I think we did talk on the pod a little bit about how I think that run might have started to flatter to deceive a little bit. I think you coined the term draw FC, and I'd said to you about if we were still draw FC at the end of this run, I'd be quite happy. But actually, upon reflection, I don't know if I am happy with us being draw FC. And what I'd like to see now, I think we had that scare, didn't we, after the Liverpool game where we lost and Ipswich won. But after the Ipswich result against Wolves at the weekend, and after we ground that point out against Arsenal, I don't necessarily want to say foolishly, I want us to go into these next few games and be a little bit more expressive. But I did hear earlier in the week another take on another Everton site that was saying they'd like to see David Moyes take the handbrake off Everton a little bit now that it effectively feels safe, and that even his own mentality around our safety seems to be that he's accepted that we're not in any real danger. So although we've got this really hard run of games, I do think I'd like to see us be a little bit more expressive. And we'll come on to it more, I dare say, when we preview the Forest game. But, going back to the Arsenal game, it was a good point. Completely echo your sentiment. I would struggle here now to give you five things that happened outside of the two goals. But yeah, I mean, I dare say there's positives to be taken when you're taking a point off of someone that then went and did what they did to Real Madrid a couple of days later. So we can't be too downbeat and disheartened. We know we're a club in a big period of transition coming to the end of this season. And obviously, I think over the last few years, if you'd have said you're going to be safe with 10 odd games to go, we'd have probably passed out in shock. So I'm very content as an Evertonian still, and I'm very happy with a point at home to Arsenal. We obviously just don't want to be losing these last few games at Goodison. So grind the results out if you need to. But yeah, I just think moving forward, I just want us to see a little bit more freedom and a little bit more creativity now that we are where we are in the league.
Yeah, I definitely get what you're saying. It's almost I think we've been stuck in this mentality for so long that just any point's good enough. Like
Yeah,
it's all been about points for the last few seasons, and as you say, the situation we're in at the moment, like as the Ipswich were kind of gaining a tiny bit of momentum in the last few weeks, but going ahead and then losing that game to Wolves, a game that they really had to win to give themselves any
yeah,
chance of getting away at all, as I think it's pretty much killed that dead, and Leicester look down and out, and Southampton obviously already relegated crazily at such an early stage.
yeah,
Where we're the level above that now, and as you say, I do agree that with these last few games, at Goodison in particular, you do just almost want to see us, as you say, expressing ourselves a little bit more, and and if things don't work out, at least there's a bit more of an entertainment factor into it, and it completely goes against everything I've been saying the last few seasons because, as you say, it's all been about points, and I don't care how we get them. Didn't care how ugly we played under Dyche as long as he was getting us 40 points a season. That was all we needed. But as you said, that's not what we want to be going forward. And as you say, it's almost now. This is a bit of a free hit almost and a chance to lay down a benchmark and show what this Everton team can go on to do really under Moyes. Um, so yeah, I completely agree, and I think Arsenal was very much that performance was very much the antithesis of that. I'd say it was a very safe, caution first performance, and I
mm,
was thinking ahead of the game that with Gabriel out, I thought there's a real chance for Beto to bully this Kyrgios lad. Not the most physical defender at all. Obviously, you're up against still a very great centre back in Saliba, who is obviously could probably match better for pace as well, which would really restrict his game. But that Kyrgios I thought was there for the taking, and I would have liked, just for one example, I would have liked to see that exploited a little bit more and better given a bit more of a lease, maybe attacking wise. And yeah, that's it. The handbrake on is a very good term, actually. I think that sums it up very well. Um, but on the on the flip side of things, I think a large part of it was also Arsenal's approach to the game and their reliance on just breaking up the play as much as possible and just almost seeming like they just didn't want the game to get into any sort of flow really, which is interesting because I think if they had let it get into a flow, it would have benefited them more than it would have benefited us. I
yeah,
think there were a few times where they, especially in the first half, I remember they were moving the ball around really well, and I'm like, we're really struggling to live with these here. In the sunshine, missing Mikalenko. Obviously, we were a little lopsided at the back with Patterson filling in at left back. I thought there were real times we were struggling to live with Arsenal a bit, and it's almost like if they just focused on that, they probably would have got the 3 points in a weird sort of way. So yeah, like
yeah.
I say, it was an interesting game, wasn't it?
And I think his selection in part was quite interesting, right? David Moyes since coming back has not been blessed with options. He's got a very threadbare squad that effectively has not been helped with the number of players we've had out injured. And we sort of now find ourselves in a situation where, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we were Mikalenko, Lindstrom, and Calvert-Lewin short of a full squad at Arsenal at the weekend. And, there were a couple of selections there that I found really interesting. I think Patterson at left back was the one that sprung out. He could have had a much worse game than he did, and I know he's one that sort of really divides our fan base, probably more so than Mikalenko and others that fill in at that position. But it got a little bit, looking at that team sheet, got a little bit too experimental for me. And then the thing that absolutely baffles me, and I know that there have been pundits and Everton forums that have spoken to this topic as to why this might be. But this idea that if we're not taking Doucouré up on his option, and there's a high chance now that he's going to move on at the end of the season, why on earth Charlie Alcaraz is getting put on the bench over Doucouré, over Jack Harrison is really interesting to me. And I think also there's a lot said for the fact that Jack Harrison is still able to get into that team over a Broja that could maybe play in that position, or just changing the formation up slightly and maybe, dare I say, going to two up top now that we've got kind of three fully fit strikers in the squad. I don't know, but I just feel that there are some names that are still getting on that team sheet that shouldn't be, given the future of the club and the part that they're going to play or not play in it with the likes of Harrison and Doucouré. And then I've been crying out to maybe see a little bit more of Patterson, which has obviously been very difficult with how well Jake O'Brien's taken to that kind of makeshift right back role. But I don't then think I needed to see him at left back to somehow give me an idea of whether or not he's got a future at Everton Football Club. So I think although it did feel slightly experimental at times on Saturday, I don't know if that was in the positive sense of the word, or if it was sort of in the positive sense of what fans may be asking for at this point of the season. I don't really know.
Yeah, I definitely get what you're saying. I think as well, it definitely seemed the case of Iwabunum getting a start. Definitely seemed like one of them where like, oh, he's come off the bench a few times this season and looked quite good in recent weeks, so probably deserved a start maybe. But I think that's actually done more harm to his stock than anything else,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he's 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 a player that has had opinions ranging from all sorts already, based on a very limited time in an Everton shirt, and actually on getting to see him on the pitch. The first few games, everyone was raving about him and said, "Oh, he's better than Onana." Like we've had Villa's pants down and all this stuff, and now suddenly he's horrendous and shouldn't be anywhere near this team. And it's just like he's played about 5 games. How can you
yeah,
possibly have gone from that to that in such a short space of time? And the fact is, he's always been very much in the middle of both of those opinions. I know football discourse nowadays, it has to be one or the other. You can't have a how dare you have any sort of nuance or balanced view? But Iwobi for me is very much in the middle of those things for me, and there's definitely a player in there. Definitely needs a lot more positional discipline in particular, I think, is what a lot of people have noticed. And our midfield has a lot more holes in it whenever he's playing. Garner has to play a little bit differently when he's next to him.
yeah,
Um, but at the same time, people were getting fed up with James Garner in recent weeks. So it's one of them where if James Garner doesn't play, someone else has to fill it in. And
absolutely.
yeah, like I said, pe people are always calling for change, but as you say, and then we make the changes, and it's just like, oh yeah, these players aren't very good either. That's why they weren't starting in the first place. But I do completely get what you're saying. Jack Harrison in particular, I think we're all fed up of watching him, and
Yeah,
he's definitely not the sort of player you want. Um, ruining the last few games at Goodison really. But yeah, it's one of them where and yeah, going on to the Alcaraz thing as well, as you say, is definitely confusing. It does seem to be maybe that Moyes isn't quite as keen on him
yeah, which is
as as
interesting.
as a lot of our fans seem to be. But at the other side of things, based on what the reports are, it might just be a case of, well, if he doesn't have to play right now, we don't have to force ourselves into a position where the option has to be taken up. It might very much just be a case of him giving himself a few more weeks just to
Mm,
decide, do I actually definitely do we definitely want him here next season? Um, and as you say, we're now in a bit more of a position of freedom in that there's more options in that he doesn't actually have to start, and doesn't have to be on the pitch, with us fighting for results. So it is a very interesting one, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out definitely. But speaking of Jack Harrison as well, I guess we should discuss the penalty. I haven't I haven't looked at this in too much great detail as I would had it not been given against us. I'm sure that way it would have got a lot more scrutiny from our fans, whereas now we're a bit happier to brush it under the carpet a little bit. But I don't know. I've kind of changed my mind on it a few times. It's one of them where again it depends on what angle you look at it, and
yeah.
I do admit I think it's one of them where if the roles are reversed, I'd probably feel we've been quite hard done by there. But at the same time, I can see why it's been given. I don't know what your thoughts are on it.
Well, I think first and foremost, I absolutely love how in the space of less than a week, Everton have become the VAR darlings of decisions going their way. If you listen to any mainstream media outlet, you'd act like Everton have never had a decision go against them with VAR, which I think thousands of Evertonians would tell you is not the case. And this is a little bit of a rarity, a blue patch, if you will, that we're in at the moment. I don't think it was a penalty. I think if that had been down the other end and that had been Arsenal's 1-0 or their equaliser, had we have taken the lead, we'd have all been spitting feathers, would have been fuming that it had robbed us of a big win at Goodison. I think that we have endured enough this year. I'm not a big believer in the whole swings and roundabouts and all these things balance themselves out. I think you take it on a game by game basis. It wasn't a penalty. Am I upset? No. I think we deserved at least a point out of that game, despite the fact we didn't play fantastically well. I think even the Liverpool game, we said probably we could have eked a draw. And I think that's very much how we're approaching these games against the bigger teams, is eking a draw. But fair play for Jack Harrison for actually doing something right, which was getting in the position where the defender has to make a decision and going to ground in a way that the referee gave it. So, that'll be when you get these YouTubers make the highlight reels of Jack Harrison's 2 seasons at Everton. It'll be that for about 35 minutes, I think, all the angles. But yeah, I don't know. Where have you landed on it? Do you think it was, having looked back on it?
I I think I think it's one of them where if the referee gives it, I think it's quite hard for VAR to overturn.
Yeah,
Um, and to be honest, I think that's what the decision should be most of the time. And this is an absolute clanger from the referee. I think in most cases the VAR should just stick with it. And we've been on the victim of that not being the case a lot in recent
yeah.
weeks. So I'm almost just relieved that, and as I say, it was the same last week as well with Tarkowski. Um, the referee sticking with his decision of just a yellow rather than a red. Um, and suddenly it's a major issue again, right on the opposite side of things. But yeah, it's just typical, as you say, that we're suddenly getting decisions going our way when, as you say, it doesn't really matter too much. It's almost like,
Yeah.
right, just give them a few just to shut them up a bit, and it'll hopefully balance things out a bit more in their mind. But yeah, I think that could almost count in some instances as an assist for Jack Harrison as well, depending on how some people measure it a bit. If you win a penalty and it goes in, that counts as an assist. So.
I
I,
mean, I mean, anybody at this stage in the season that has Jack Harrison in their fantasy Premier League team, ring us. We'll open a helpline to
yeah.
support you because there's no way,
Yeah.
no way,
Yeah, even his mom doesn't have him in her
no.
fantasy team, So
Don't even think Jack Harrison has himself in his own fantasy team at this point.
yeah, but yeah, I guess I guess we can stick on Harrison going into one of the major lineup decisions. I'm sure they'll be going into the game on Saturday. And we'll also, I'm sure we'll talk about the approach as you've just said about um grounding out draws a little bit and whether that should be a little bit different going into this game. But yeah, so like I say, going through team selection decisions and as you say, how we should approach the game. What are you thinking going into this game away at Forest on Saturday?
I'm going to be quite controversial just to mix things up, I think. For me, I think we need to see Beto on the bench for this one. Now, and I think let me explain why. I think he had such a great run when he first came into the team, and we talked about what he does off the ball and the fact that he's a handful for defenders. I think teams are now starting to plan for Everton on the premise that we have a very big, imposing striker up front. What we have in the other two on the bench, in Broja and Schmidt, are two pretty unknown entities in the Premier League in terms of recent performance and consistency because they've been out injured. They've not shown what they can do currently. So for me, I would potentially give Broja a run out and let Beto come off the bench maybe against a sort of tiring Forest defence. And I know we've just been talking about Jack Harrison. For me, if Dwight McNeil is off crutches at this point, it needs to be McNeil and then Die on the wings, and I would put Alcaraz in the middle. I would really kind of change that front four up now, in the interest of, as we've talked about, taking the handbrake off. Forest showed at Villa, and albeit a very good Villa side, by the way, like we take nothing away from Villa, but Forest have shown that they are not invincible, that they're going to have bumps in their road to trying to secure a top four place this season. We have very little to play for, but again, I'd like to just mix it up and try and sort of confuse the opposition a little bit. And I think we've got enough there now with a fully fit squad that the defense pretty much picks itself. I think we'd hope that Mikalenko would be back. If not, I'd probably go in with Ashley Young rather than Patterson. But aside from that, I'd kind of bring Garner back in for Irabunum as well. So I'm sort of proposing, I guess, fleeting changes, but mainly when talking about the front four.
Yeah, so I guess I'll pose you two questions here based on that straight away, and like I said, I don't necessarily disagree with any of that. I'd be quite interested to see how this would play, but I'll say, um, what are your reasons for going with Brozier over Tremity, and how would you want the three behind them to be lining up in terms of left, centre, and right midfield?
So I think Broja over Chimiti is simply because time is running out on that loan deal for Broja. I think realistically Chimiti is going because he's an Everton player. He's going to the preseason in the States. I think Moyes has got a lot of time to really look at him, and I think he will. He'll have a very keen eye on him in preseason. I think Broja's got the remainder of the Premier League, and I think that everyone that's sort of called for, we don't need to take the option, we can simply extend him, do a Jack Harrison, and have him on another loan. I think our use of the loan market in recent seasons has not been good enough. There's lots of parts of Everton Football Club where you can say it's not been good enough, but the loan market seems to be one we've not really got right. So I think Moyes needs to have a look at Broja. We talked on the pod last week about all these players coming out and saying they want to stay, they want to go and play in the new stadium. I think you've got to give those players a chance to prove it. I mean, Jack Harrison has earned his ticket back to Leeds, as far as I'm concerned. I think we're all there with him. I don't know on Broja. Like, he's made of Weetabix, but if he has come back now and he's like a little bit more resilient and a little bit stronger for the experience and he can get some goals, he does offer. There is clearly a player there. There's a whole nation in Albania that believe he's the second coming. So like, we've got to see something that they're seeing at some point. So that's my reason for him. In terms of the three behind, I think it is quite simple that you do McNeil on the right, which I think is probably going to raise some eyebrows, and Die on the left, and then Alcaraz in the middle. But I think what you've got there are three who could interchange throughout the game. And again, I think that's something we've lacked in recent lineups is you've lacked or lost the option of those players that can swap because you don't want to see Doucouré drifting out wide. He has to stay central. So I'm hoping that although those three don't necessarily fit those three positions totally organically in all three cases, I think you've got enough there to maybe move around and try some different things behind Broja.
Yeah, I think I think we're all done with the McNeil in the middle experiment.
Yeah, that's
Again,
finished. Yeah.
PTSD flashbacks that are bring, I'm sure, but it's I don't know. It's for me, it's the idea of I don't think I can feasibly. I think McNeil. I've seen enough of him on the right to know it doesn't work. He's just not quick enough to be cutting inside like that,
Yeah.
and I think you lose out on him being out on the left and being able to get to the byline and whipping the crosses. So I think if McNeil plays, he almost has to be on the left, and then as you say, it almost leads to the idea of Ndiaye and Alcaraz could maybe do that interchanging role and
Yeah.
kind of be drifting between the middle and the right. And I said I my instincts tell me it's maybe a game too soon for McNeil anyway, and it might very well be the City game that he maybe gets a start again. But I don't know. Moyes is I thought it'd be a game too soon for Ndiaye against Arsenal, and yet he got the start. And
Straight in, wasn't he?
yeah,
Yeah.
and obviously he didn't get to complete the game. It looked like it was maybe a bit too much for him. He didn't quite have 90 minutes in him, but still had 60 or 70 minutes or whatever it was that he played. But yeah, that'd probably be if as I say, we need Harrison out of the team. So if McNeil is fit, as you say, get him involved, and that's probably what I'd be doing with it as well. Similarly, and then. I think I do agree. I do think Brozier as well kind of suits this profile of game a little bit more than a Trinity would. I completely agree about your point on Better as well, in that defenders know they just have to be a bit of a yard off him, and the balls will be played in behind, and they'll be able to make it up. Whereas Brozier can do a little bit more. He can do more of the hold up play. He's better on the ball, better driving with it. And as you say, we have only seen flashes of him, but to be fair, I can see that there's a player in there definitely. And as you say, the injuries definitely count against him. But if he gets to put a bit of a run of form together here at the end of the season, um, then it then who knows? It might very well be that we take up that option on him, or as you say, get him on loan again for another year, and hopefully he's able to stay fit for a bit longer and offer us something. But as you say, I do think Schmidt needs more first team football, and the sooner the better. And with these last few weeks of the season, there is really no better time for it. So I guess you look at those games against Ipswich, for example, or even the Southampton game. Not entirely sure what sort of side we'll be looking at to play there. But there are games I could definitely see Trinity getting the start and hopefully getting some valuable minutes in the tank. But yeah, as you say, we've spoken a bit about this game, and when I think, as you said, we're not entirely sure what sort of Forest side are going to show up here. It could very well be that the pressure's starting to get to them a little bit. I'm not sure, but what's your prediction going into this one?
Oh, I mean, it's a hard one to call, isn't it? And we said when we previewed the run, this one was probably the one that we were looking at going, oh, that's one of the trickier ones, given that I think Forest would feel massively disheartened if they don't finish the season top four. I think they've done so well given where they were last season, and you got to give Nuno credit. I think a lot of people had written Nuno off after the spell at Tottenham and then going over to sort of Saudi, and I think it was a bit of an eyebrow raiser when he came in at Forest. So you have to give them immense credit. And it's also really nice for the Premier League in general to sort of see Villa do it last season and then potentially Forest do it. And that will give a lot of hope to us as Evertonians, these kind of sleeping giants from the 80s that are slowly waking up, that's what we want for our football club. So, hats off to Forest. With that being said, I I'm losing confidence in our ability to score goals from open play. I think that the penalty and scoring the penalty at the weekend, it's great that we're still able to occasionally get a goal from a set piece, but our open play and taking those chances has left a lot to be desired in recent weeks. So I'd potentially go for another 1-1. And just be optimistic that we might get something from a corner, but our ability to score from free play does concern me a little bit. And actually, what has concerned me a lot in recent weeks that has probably gone a little bit under the radar is that we don't keep clean sheets consistently anymore. We do look a little bit more fragile. We're still quite hard to beat and very organized, I think, but we never do ourselves a disservice kind of shipping 2 or 3 goals in a game. But yeah, my confidence in us being able to keep a clean sheet has gone too. So 1-1 is my optimistic outlook. But as I think listeners will probably tell from this week, I'm weirdly feeling a little bit lower than usual on Everton. I think we've come into these podcasts on such a high since Moyes has been back, and maybe I'm just looking at this run we're in the middle of and thinking that it's a little bit like, oh, I can't call it. So I'm going to be optimistic and say a draw. But what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think we've all undergone a little bit of a reality check, I think, in the last few weeks. And, I think we were really riding a high when Moyes came in. But I think all those people that were saying at the start, it's still the same group of players that Dyche had. I, it would take an amazing manager to really get a lot out of this group of players. And I think we're seeing that in the last few weeks. And I think maybe Moyes has learned a little bit more about the limitations that this current group of players have, and knows that this squad needs a lot of work in the summer. Um, and yeah, I agree with the point as well about us shipping goals quite a bit more. I think the goal we conceded on Saturday is the exact type of situation where Forest will also punish us. That's what they'll be looking to do, like latching onto any mistakes and getting down the pitch fast. And I think there will be times we maybe struggle to live with the pace of your Elangas and your Hudson-Odois and all that. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a tough game. I'd like to think that approach from Forest will hopefully give us a bit more of a chance to, as you say, express ourselves a bit more and make life difficult for Forest and just, but also keep that caution on the counter attack. So I don't know really. I don't really know what I'm feeling about this game. I don't want to say another draw because I'm sick of them. But uh, I'll go optimistic and say we'll win 2-1 and really put a dent in their top four aspirations, as we've said. Um, I wanted to briefly have a word on this as well towards the end about
Okay.
everyone's been talking about the Southampton game. A lot of minds have turned to it, and as we record this, it's still not been announced when what day it's going to be, what time it's going to be, all of that. I think it should have been announced about a week ago, but the Premier League have fallen behind on this as ever. Um, and it's raised a lot of debate. A fab statement went out yesterday, and anyone who knows me on this channel will probably know that my own dad's involved in that, so he'll be pleased at me mentioning this. But yeah, like a fab statement went out yesterday, trying to raise a bit of awareness and basically trying to address the club and the Premier League. If there's any time for this decision to maybe be considered, that the Monday that's being very heavily rumoured is really not preferable. Not the preferred option for pretty much any supporter, as you can imagine. Um, and yeah, like I said, I think the general consensus most people have for a certain day, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on the whole situation really, and when you think it should be played.
Yeah, I mean, I think I very much stand behind what the general vibe of our fans is. I think a Monday night is inexcusable. I think that there's this idea, isn't there, that Goodison under the lights, its final game before shutting its doors, and it'll be great because Sky will be there and they'd come down and probably do it live from the ground and all of this sort of pomp and circumstance that I don't think your typical kind of match going fan really cares about, to be perfectly honest. I think, given the opposition and taking into account away fans, I think it has to be kind of a Sunday lunchtime game, to be perfectly honest. I know the Saturday is out of the question because of the FA Cup final. So I think really to give Southampton fans like a fair chance at coming up. And, there was this sort of ludicrous idea that we'd ask them to not come so that there's 3,000 extra seats available for the home fans. And I think that's where I'd maybe draw the line in terms of making allowances for our final game. But yeah, I think it's got to be sort of the 2 o'clock game on a Sunday for me. I think Sunday night is it's not fair for any of those travelling fans or any of the Evertonians that come a little bit further afield. And the same goes for the Monday night. You want to just really enjoy, or I'll rephrase that because it's not about enjoying it, but you want to say goodbye to Goodison in whatever way you want to celebrate, mourn, commiserate, enjoy, embrace that moment. And I think if you're saying you've got to go and do a full day's work on the Monday, think about getting to the ground, maybe cutting those sort of pre-match rituals short on what is effectively the last time. I think you're doing the fans a disservice. I would just say to conclude my monologue on this point is I think that the overall handling of the last season at Goodison Park by most parties has been a bit of a ish show, to save you some editing, Al. Like, I'll refrain from swearing. I don't think there's been anything that has been like wow about our final season. There's been some very questionable training tops that Castor brought out. There's been a lot of focus, obviously, on the new stadium and encouraging fans to embrace the transition. There's been very little in the way of this is your last moment in your home, and we want you to enjoy it and commemorate it. So I think there's a bit of a telling off to the club, really. And I know there's been that transition of ownership, but there's been no contingency for that really for me, which is sad. But on that game in general, yeah, it's got to be a Sunday kind of 2 o'clock game for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. You want to make a day of it, don't you? Like, And as you say, you'd imagine that the club would try and plan around this and make it an event. I'm not entirely sure if that's actually what's going to go ahead. We haven't heard
Yeah.
anything. And as you say, based on how this season has gone, um, I can't see there being too much of that. But yeah, I completely agree. I think it's got to be the Sunday. I could understand Sunday afternoon, not too late in the evening. I think would be fair enough. But you don't, as you say, you don't want to be going to the game straight from work and having to pretty much leave on the whistle. You want it to be a big occasion, don't you? And just on the Southampton fans as well. I'm sure it'll be one of them where we get given the upper allocation. And if there are just any Southampton fans watching this who are planning on going up, just consider that I'm sure there are many Evertonians out there willing to offer you a lot of money for your ticket. And I shouldn't be encouraging that at all, but it's true. And I think they'll have a difficult time trying to control it all a little bit. I do worry a tiny bit about
Yeah, same.
the
Yeah.
last day, but I'd like to think that's hopefully been planned for. Um, but just before we end, we'll do the lineup quiz as usual, and I know we usually do it in that it's it's centered around the team we're playing this weekend, but obviously there's only been a few games against Forest in the last few years, and it feels a little too easy. And obviously, I'm not gonna at the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm not going to give you a game all the way from the 90s. So what I've done instead is I've chosen a game from the date that we're going to be playing on Saturday, so the 12th of April, going all the
Okay.
way back to 2009, um, when we were wearing the shirt that I'm wearing right now, to be
It's a
fair.
great kit. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
great
really,
kit.
really great, great season as well. So yeah, this is Aston Villa 3, Everton 3. Back when we were challenging Aston Villa for European places, as opposed to Nottingham Forest. But yeah, so 2008-09 season, prime first Moyes era. Whenever you're ready.
Goodness me. Okay, so Tim Howard would have been in goal.
Yep.
Yeah, and then we'd have had. Now, this was the season that we were massively plagued with injuries, wasn't it? So I dare say I'm going to get caught out on a few here. Let's just go through the defense because that was pretty straightforward, wasn't it, at the time? So I'm going to say Baines and Phil Neville,
Yeah, Baines and Phil Neville are both in the team. Yeah.
and then was this Jags got injured or? But I'm going to say Distan would have been there, and I'm going to take a punt at Jagielka.
It's a season too early for Distan. Um,
Oh no!
but Jagielka is in the side, yeah. So you've
Oh, it
got
would have been
four and you've lost a life.
Lescott would
Yeah,
have been there,
Lescott's
right?
final
Yeah.
season. Yeah, that's five.
Yeah. Okay. And then Arteta and Cahill.
Arteta was injured. He's one of the injuries you're
Oh
talking about.
no.
So that's another life lost. But Cahill's in there. Yeah, that's six.
Whew, okay. We'll go safe bet then. Leon Osman.
Leon Osman. Yeah.
Okay. Pina.
Stephen Pienaar. Yeah.
Who has there been the other winger that season? Oh my goodness. Um, is this sort of pre-Coleman dropping back? Would Coleman have played?
Coleman's not in the team yet. No,
Oh no.
no.
I
So
suck at these out. I'm so
yeah.
bad at these games.
I'd say this season in particular, I'm very very swotty on. This is my first season watching it. I think I could tell you every game to be honest, honestly. But so yeah, so Phil Neville was actually in the midfield, which I think threw you off a little bit. So it was
Yeah,
Tony Hibbert at right
of
back,
course. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the club icon, of course, and then so Osman was actually the winger as well. So again, that's thrown you off a little bit. Osman on the right.
Yeah.
And then I think otherwise you just missed Fellaini and Joe.
Oh
Everyone's
man, what a cult hero Joe was. Yeah.
everyone's favourite striker, yeah. And then again, the bench is just a classic Everton bench, really. Carlo Nash, as I'm sure we've praised on here before. Lars Jacobson, Dan Gosling, Jack Rodwell, Andy van der Meijden, uh,
Wow.
Segundo Castillo, everyone's favourite fashion
Yeah.
icon at the moment,
Amazing.
with those suits in Ecuador, and Louis Sahar came off the bench as well. So yeah, like I say, what an amazing team that was. This
Yeah,
was the
great
week
team.
before we went to the FA Cup semi-final. Potentially
Such
the
good
best day
game.
of my life. I was there at Wembley, 6-year-old me, and yeah, like I said, my dad tried to warn me it's not usually this good, but I didn't listen. But yeah.
And here you are all these years later,
Yeah, yeah.
huh?
Still wearing the shirt, trying to bring it all back. But
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you very much for joining me again, Harry, and thank you all for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the Toffee Blues channel for more Everton content, and we will see you in the next video. Up the Toffees.